All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is uh, a preview of the DeKalb County Trail and Greenway Master Plan recommendations. It looks like we have a good number of participants already joined, and I'm sure a few more folks will join as they're able, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So before we dive into the content, a few tips about using chat and asking questions. We would ask that you please use the Q&A icon located at the bottom of the screen to ask any questions that arise for you during the presentation. And questions that you ask about the Trails Master Plan process or presentation that you would like answered by the project team will be answered at the end of the presentation as we're able. We'll be monitoring the chat, but we prefer that you submit questions you would like answered during the meeting through the Q&A. And we would also kindly ask that you please be respectful of our panelists and other attendees here. So we are going to talk about the Trail and Greenway Master Plan tonight. We are going to go over the purpose and scope of the plan. We will summarize what we heard from the public engagement process. We will summarize the existing conditions analysis that informed our work, and we will preview the Trail Vision Network, which again is preliminary at this point, and then we'll go over next steps. Before we introduce the project team, I would like to ask the commissioners or if they have any of their staff here to please raise their hands. If there's something you'd like to say as we get started, we'd be happy to unmute you. So we'll give you guys a few minutes to do that.
Hi, everyone. This is Beth Ganga. I am the Policy and Planning Manager for Commissioner Michelle Long Spears, District 2. Unfortunately, she had a family emergency and wasn't able to be here tonight, but a couple of the staff from her office are here on this Zoom. Thank you.
All right, anyone else before we move on? Miranda, you can go ahead.
Yes, hi. Sorry, it's been a minute since I've been in a panel situation. My name is Miranda. I'm here representing Super District 6, Commissioner Ted Terry's office. We're excited to learn more, and thank you for hosting this.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the folks who have been involved with this process. We have been so grateful for our partnership with DeKalb County in developing the countywide Trail and Greenway Master Plan. This plan has come through the Department of Recreation, Parks, and Cultural Affairs, and their leadership team has been so enthusiastic about creating a well-planned trail and greenway system that sets a new standard of excellence. We're also thankful to all the commissioners and their staff who have taken the time to share their insights over the past year, really, about the county's trails during our stakeholder meetings and other public engagement sessions. We'd also like to thank the county's Transportation Division and Planning and Sustainability, who have shared their wisdom and insights at various points in the process. My name is Eric Childs. I'm with Tool Design, and we are the nation's leading firm specializing in bicycle and pedestrian facility planning and design. I will speak a little bit more on our experience on the next slide, but we're proud to be partnered with Blue Cypress Consulting. They're headquartered in Decatur, and they've been providing their unparalleled expertise in public outreach. And we'll give everybody a chance to introduce themselves individually in just a second. We also have on our team HRNA Advisors. They're an economic and real estate consultancy with more than 3 decades of experience contributing to the planning and development of parks, plazas, streetscapes, and other urban spaces. And they've been developing the economic analysis briefing book and cost benefit analysis associated with this project. A little bit more about tool design. We have served as the lead author of National Trail guidance documents, including both the 2012 and forthcoming editions of the AASHTO guide for the development of bike facilities. We are continually at the forefront of best practices of the next generation of trail planning and design. We also helped the Federal Highway Administration develop the shared use path level of service calculator, and we're continually involved with national best practice research projects across the country. We have a reputation for producing successful trail and greenway master plans that cast a clear vision and are tailored to the unique characteristics of each community in which we work. So I've introduced myself, and I'd like to pass it off to Byron Rushing, who is our trail network lead. Byron, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Good evening, everyone. I will echo Eric's point that I'm very excited to be here and share our work with you all tonight. It is awesome to see so many attendees in the conference. And I'm going to be talking a little bit later about the Vision Network, but very briefly, Byron Rushing with Tool Design. I've been here for just over a year now, and previously I was at the Atlanta Regional Commission where I managed the regional walking and bicycling and trails program. So very excited to bring some of my expertise down to DeKalb County and share some of that. I'm also a Decatur native as well too, so a lot of this work has a very personal ramification for me growing up around the DeKalb trails, and I'll maybe share a story or two as we get into the network.
Anna, would you like to go next?
Sure, thank you, Eric. I'm Anna Johnson with Blue Cypress Consulting. We are located in downtown Decatur. We're a women-owned business, and we do community planning, including public engagement and land use planning and transportation planning in the Metro Atlanta area. And then we also have a utility services side of our company. So I'm very excited to be here. I'm also a DeKalb County resident. So this has been near and dear to, I think, all of us on the project team. And yep, thank you, Eric. I will pass it to whoever, if anyone else on our project team is here.
So Connie and Jeff are not here, but they are involved. Connie is with HRNA, and Jeff is a national trails expert who's been guiding our team along. And I'll say one last thing. I spent the first part of my childhood in DeKalb County, played baseball at Wade Walker Park, and lived in Decatur a few years ago. So I've, like Anna and Byron said, this is a passion project for all of us. So we're here this evening to preview the preliminary recommendations of the Trail and Greenway Master Plan for the county. We are going to ask for your feedback at the end, and we're going to share next steps. So the purpose and scope of this project. DeKalb County's trails today currently contain over 65 miles of greenways, trails, and paved paths. These trails provide recreational opportunities as well as transportation options for users. These trails have been built by local governments and private organizations over the past 3 decades. And like many trail systems in the Metro Atlanta region, the county's trails are largely disconnected from each other. This lack of connectivity limits the benefits that an interconnected county trail network could provide. And so why was this plan needed? The predecessor to this plan was DeKalb's Greenway Trails, produced back in 2000 by the Path Foundation. And this countywide plan positioned the county to receive federal funding for greenway development and active transportation projects. In subsequent years, the county's 2014 Transportation Plan and the Atlanta Regional Commission's Regional Transportation Plan, a number of city master plans, small area plans, and paths, numerous trail and greenway studies are all relevant, but they did not focus on the benefits of a county-wide trail network specifically. And then in 2022, the DeKalb 2050 Unified Plan, which included the county's comprehensive transportation plan, represented a major step forward in establishing transportation priorities over the next 30 years. The CTP, the transportation plan, established 11 transportation priorities on the next slide that helped guide the goals for this master plan. I'm not going to read all these, but I do think it's worth highlighting a few things, such as the desire to provide connectivity across different modes of transportation, enabling healthy communities, increasing access to jobs and destinations, and practicing fiscal responsibility in transportation investments. Now, I want to take a minute and make sure we're all on the same page in terms of the language we are using to describe trails. We are defining trails as trails, greenways, and shared use paths, and these are facilities that serve people walking, bicycling, or utilizing other non-motorized modes of transportation. They provide opportunities for recreation, connection to nature, green space, and increasingly transportation for members of the community and visitors to DeKalb County. I also want to clearly define the scope of what this plan covers. It is focused on expanding the network of paved or hard surface trails in unincorporated DeKalb County. So some of DeKalb's incorporated cities have existing trails and/or trail and greenway master plans. And this plan, as we'll get into, recognizes the value of connectivity between county and city trails, and wherever possible, prioritizes those connections. One thing that is not included in this plan are soft surface trails, such as crushed stone, mulch, or natural surface trails. In this plan, we're generally talking about two types of trails based on where the trail is physically located. When a trail is adjacent to a road, we tend to call those side paths. They're immediately adjacent and usually parallel to a roadway, as you can kind of see on the right there. And then there are independently aligned trails, and those are trails that are not associated with a roadway, and that's what you would think of as more of a greenway. They may be located through parkland or linear corridors, alongside streams, or through forested or even rural land. So in this plan, we have different major deliverables. We started with community and stakeholder engagement, and Anna will speak to that in just a minute. We performed a technical analysis of the existing trail network, along with economic cost-benefit analysis, and that is what has led to the Trail and Greenway Vision Network that we're going to preview tonight. One part of this plan that is not going to show up tonight, but we are busy working on it in the background, is two deliverables: trail design guidelines and maintenance and operation guidelines. And those are informed by an assessment of the existing conditions on the ground that our team performed, as well as our knowledge and involvement in writing nationwide standards and best practices. And so with that, I'm going to pass it off to Anna.
Thank you, Eric. I will walk through what we heard through public and stakeholder engagement. And Eric, you can navigate to the next slide. So this project started out with engagement. Back in August 2023, we participated in a local community event where we had a project booth to kind of launch the project, spread project awareness, launch input opportunities, including our survey and map input tool. And we did a few other pop-up events in the fall, followed by a series of open houses. We also had some online input opportunities that were active during this time and into 2024. So as you can see, we've been out in the community in a lot of different capacities and formats, both in person and online, We've engaged with hundreds of community members, some of whom come to a lot of meetings and are avid trail users, some of whom would like to be trail users, a lot of youth. As you can see at the pop-up events, we always had fun activities that were geared towards youth, which was great to hear their perspectives, especially because over the next 20 years, which is the planning horizon for this plan, those youth will be becoming some of our key stakeholders and trail users. So we will be updating after this round of engagement. We'll continue to update our participation numbers and look forward to continued engagement as we head towards plan adoption. You can go to the next slide, Eric. So on this slide here, it shows the locations of various in-person events, including our open house series. We had five open houses last fall. Like I said, 3 pop-up events. Between last fall and this summer, we've had 4 walking tours, some geared towards the community and some towards some of our key stakeholders, such as elected and appointed officials, trail advocacy groups, county departments, municipalities, and other stakeholders. Our project team was out on the trails doing intercept surveys, and that's just where we go up to folks that are using the trails and ask them a couple short questions to understand. We're really out there trying to identify understand what are different perspectives on key challenges and needs and opportunities along DeKalb County's trail network. You can go to the next slide, Eric. So our approach for engagement really leveraged community events where we could meet people where they were in the community, and not just events where people had to come to us. We really wanted to be out in the community, meeting people where they were, and hearing a variety of perspectives. So you can see some of the quotes we heard, and people told us what they loved about the trails, what they wish they had on the trails, whether it was safety. People love access to nature and having somewhere to walk or jog or ride their bike or scooter. And they also, told us ways that they felt they could be improved, whether it was, the materials used or the maintenance, even, thinking about a more sustainable construction ideas. So again, we were really out in the community, elevating our different voices and representation around DeKalb County. And you can go to the next slide. So these represent some of the key themes that we heard emerging from these community conversations that we've been having over the past almost year. And these came both from our in-person meetings, from our online input opportunities, as well as our conversation with some of our key stakeholders. And so the themes represent, key needs and opportunities for improving and expanding DeKalb County's trail network. So things like connectivity, trail access and accessibility, enhancements to amenities and safety, protection and conservation of natural resources, and trail improvements and maintenance. And these echo some of the transportation priorities that Eric described earlier, and you'll continue to hear these themes pop up as we walk through the presentation. So I will pass it on to Byron, I believe, who's going to walk through existing conditions.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. And just to confirm, Eric, you're advancing the slides still, correct?
Yes.
All right. Well, again, hello, everybody. Byron Rushing with Tool Design. I really like the way that we have this laid out, so we get to pivot from Anna's conversation on what we heard from the community. And really, in every plan, we try to start with community conversations, but this one we really did, where we got a chance to have several of our engagement opportunities before we got into the more technical data analysis. So I'm going to walk us through our data assessments, what we call our existing conditions, what is out in the county on the landscape now that we need to utilize to meet our plan objectives. So Eric, go ahead and walk us through this. And be prepared, if you love them or hate them, there's going to be a lot of maps for the next couple of slides. That's the way we're looking at this. So as Eric has already mentioned, the map on the left is existing trails in the county. Several of the big ones that are very famous and we all know, Arabia Mountain and Panola Mountain, the South River Trail, kind of the grandfather of all Metro Atlanta trails, and the Stone Mountain Trail that was conceived initially in the early 90s and then built throughout the Olympics era. That's kind of my home trail. Growing up as a teenager, getting to ride my bike out to Stone Mountain back. So it means a lot to me. And then Mason Mill, and then also in the pieces of this plan, the city's trails that will not be directly within DeKalb County's responsibility moving forward, but we want to make sure we highlight those as places for connections and places for opportunities to walk. So the trails around Brookhaven, Chamblee, Doraville, the Peachtree Creek Greenway, which kind of moves in and out of cities in the county at various points, and lots of other small trail connections that were really valuable to cities and neighborhoods and to the county as a whole. But in the objective of this plan, could use connectivity for easier ways to get to them. So starting with what we know about the existing trail locations, and we have many of them on there, not all of them have names, but hopefully they look familiar to folks in the county. We moved on to common daily destinations. So places that people are going typically on a daily, bi-weekly, weekly basis for some reason. Schools, first and foremost, for our youngest non-driving population, kids who might be able to get to school if a trail connection was improved within that short distance to a school. Grocery stores for weekly trips, libraries, frequent destinations that we would look for community services, including even hospitals. And you see those dots on there where they're distributed around the county. And at this point, we started to buffer and start to look for those half-mile or mile walking zones where trails through a neighborhood street could access common destinations. And one of our other objectives is to increase access to daily destinations. And then the third map on this page, access to transit, because trails very often serve a great, what we planners call, oh, thank you, Rochelle. I will slow down just a bit. I tend to get really excited about maps. We planners call first and last mile connections. So somebody who takes the train into Decatur Station, Avondale Station, Kensington, could use a trail to make that last piece of their trip into a neighborhood, or a bus route that goes near a neighborhood. The trail can serve a nice, comfortable, safe alternate to walk to the rest of their destination for their trip. So looking at transit connectivity and helping transit expand into more portions of the metro region through the trails network also. Eric, next slide. So those are the current destinations. We also went up a layer of our analysis to start to look at some future destinations and some bigger ways the trails can help support the county. So the first map on this page is what the county calls activity centers. So zones of commercial or employment centers that provide access to jobs or businesses or stores that you see clustered around the county in different places. The activity centers map is also important because it's the way that DeKalb County as a county envisions growing in the future. The county has a policy to steer more development towards those centers wherever possible. So building trails to those places provide more access to jobs and commercial destinations. Closely related to that, we looked at the future land use plans for the county. So areas the county envisions in the long term, 30 years, remaining residential or potentially becoming denser with different kinds of investments. So again, thinking about how trails can help support the future growth of the county and where they provide new connections and new opportunities for people to travel. And then finally, the third map on this page, a critical question is, how are trails distributed fairly to all populations and all demographics throughout the county? This is a big issue for the metro region as a whole, is making sure that transportation investments are fair. And so we looked at the metro region, the Atlanta Regional Commission's equity framework, which casts census tracts based on different population demographics. And they have, it gets very technical. I'm happy to answer more questions about it, but their equity analysis criteria has zones of higher concentration of equity concern. Very often that is a combination of minority populations or low income populations or low car household ownership in different categories, and then areas of lower diversity. And so making sure that the trails work through the whole county and are distributed evenly and fairly to all populations who would like to access them. Okay, Eric, next slide. And these maps are a bit messy. Apologies, I made them, but they're very helpful for us in our planning process. So the map on the left is all current planned trails in the county. The dark blue lines being trails through the county's comprehensive transportation plan, what we call CTP, and then other trails in cities like Stonecrest, Tucker, City of Atlanta, Doraville, Dunwoody. So trying to make sure that even where the county is not responsible for building trails in a city, we're looking for those connection points. And this becomes very important, especially around some of the connections into Arabia Mountain, entirely in the city of Stonecrest. So making sure that we're finding ways to elevate local investments into the county significance, and then county investments up into the regional metro program as well. Also, the map on the right does that, which is looks for connections to neighboring counties, Gwinnett County, Rockdale, and into the city of Atlanta. When we went out and talked to people on trails, Anna mentioned that we did intercept surveys to meet people on the trails and have conversations. We asked them where they would like to travel, and the top 4 destinations, the first 3 were the mountains: Stone Mountain, Arabia Mountain, and Panola Mountain. And then the 4th on that list was the Atlanta Beltline to the west. So when we sat down to draw the vision map and look for future connections, all of those became very important. Gwinnett County is also updating their trails plan right now. So we've worked with their team to make sure we identify places to move between the counties, and not let the conversation be entirely within DeKalb County, but really look for opportunities to travel throughout the metro region wherever possible. Eric, next slide. And then finally, a lot of this gets summed up into a map that I really like for what we call trip potential. So taking the places that people live, the places people work, and the different daily destinations, and kind of summing them up into a heat map that shows in the purple zones areas of very high trip potential, especially short trips under a few miles that would be great on foot or bike. And then areas of lower potential where there's less density and there's less opportunities for people to travel. But the really cool thing about trails is those less dense areas are also very typically easier places to travel, scenic places, areas around Arabia Mountain or the parks areas. So they're really often scenic destinations and places that trails provide a different kind of experience, but a really great one as well also. So Eric, next slide. And then finally, to wrap up our kind of planner technical piece of it, we looked at the adopted funding strategies in DeKalb County. So on the left, the DeKalb County transportation plan and the projects that the county has queued up for funding in the next few years, either through the SPLOST tax or other funding venues, and make sure that we capture the county's funding priorities and keep them relevant in the bigger network. And then to the right, looking at previous planning studies that have happened in the county, in cities, or through other groups, even going back as far to that 2000s plan to figure out what is still relevant, what is not relevant, what has kind of slipped off the political and public radar, and what can we bring back in or elevate if needed. It's interesting doing this work in DeKalb County because Eric showed maps through 2000, but there's even maps going back to through the 90s, 80s, into the 70s. And with such a dense built out county, whenever we look for new connections, very typically someone has studied it before. So we tried to learn from those previous studies to say, where have conversations been had, where has work been done, what is just not feasible, and what might be able to get pulled back into the current conversation. So we've done a lot of reading and research on this as well too. Eric, next slide. And then, as I mentioned, really pull the trails out of the county transportation plan. There's other projects in the CTP that for bikeways, for sidewalks, for other types of multimodal connections. Sometimes those are great connections and we can pull and use different types of projects for different purposes. But we want to make sure that we're building on the good work that DeKalb County has done in the past few years and continue to elevate those segments wherever possible. Eric, next slide. Okay, and next we're going to move into the draft trail vision network. So the vision network is the term that we use for the long-term, somewhat unconstrained perspective that we're taking on how we can meet the plan's objectives and help people move around the county in a safe and comfortable fashion. So it pulls in pieces of different projects, pieces of different local plans, and puts them into a big network that when we show it, people can say, oh, I see, I could move from Decatur down to Arabia Mountain, or Decatur up to Dunwoody, or along the Peachtree Creek Greenway into the Beltline, or out to Gwinnett County in different ways. The Vision Network is made up of lots of different pieces, and we'll talk about how we constructed some of that in just a minute. But it's really the big conceptual framework that we use for looking at county connectivity. Next slide. And Eric, I'm going to let you talk for just a minute while I take a sip of water, and I'll be back in just a second.
All right, and this is opportune because before we reveal the preliminary vision network map, I do want to take another minute or two to explain where we are in the project development process. So broadly speaking, before a trail project can be built, it has to be planned and designed. And this countywide trail and greenway master plan represents a very preliminary planning phase. The goal of this project is, in part, to help the county prioritize projects that meet the goals and principles that have been defined by public and stakeholder input, technical analysis, and the county's goals for the trail network. So what is the Trail Vision Network and what is it about? It's about the big moves. So it takes a 30,000 foot view and thinks in terms of 10 years and 20 years about how the county could increase connectivity between existing trails, expand access to trails, connect to key destinations, and achieve the other goals and principles we've identified. The map you're seeing here is representing some of those initial big moves or even our thoughts about the big moves with these large magenta arrows. In a few slides, we'll reveal the proposed vision network, and the corridors or connections that you see on those plans are going to look a little more specific than this. But I do want to explain that the intent of the vision network is actually closer to what this diagram is trying to convey. It's about making those key connections, not quite necessarily about making the site-specific decisions about exactly where these proposed trails will go. So once you have identified a project as part of a trail corridor, typically, and once funding is beginning to align or coalesce around those projects, feasibility studies are often the next step. This is a more detailed planning effort that often evaluates several different trail alignment alternatives based on site-specific and project-specific information. So evaluating the feasibility or 2 or 3 different trail alignments may depend on a number of factors. Good trail designers will think about maximizing environmental sustainability, land ownership issues, access to and from the trail, including trailhead location and design, any desired amenities, access to destinations, stormwater management, trail user safety and experience, among other things. Public engagement is also a key part of these feasibility studies. And after considering all these factors, trail designers will develop a preliminary opinion of probable cost for all of the alignments, and that helps identify the preferred option that moves on to final design. And so once you get into final design, which is typically a totally separate project from the feasibility study, that's where designers and engineers begin making site-specific decisions about how the trail will physically lay out in space. And during that process, the design team uses topographic survey and tree inventory, other environmental information, sometimes in the form of cultural and natural resource reports that guide the team's design approach and helps ensure that we're meeting those initial goals that were set forth in the vision network and in the feasibility studies. These final design drawings go through multiple rounds of review by the county or whoever the client might be. Permits have to be obtained, and then design requirements must be met, such as avoiding impacts to stream buffers or impacting the critical root zones of trees. When drawings are complete, they're let for bid, and then the winning contractor begins construction. Again, we are super far away from this phase, but this is where it ends up. These are all the steps you have to do to build a trail. And I'm going to pass it back to Byron now.
Thank you, Eric. So we'll recap a few things. As Anna started out, themes that we heard from public feedback, public input initially in the project. So talking to people and having the online survey, hopefully many of y'all were able to take that. People said, please increase connectivity within the existing network. So people wanting to get from Stone Mountain to Arabia Mountain was a common one. People wanting to get from the Peachtree Creek Greenway into the Atlanta Beltline, or through the different cities in the county, as well as connections to new destinations that they can't access via trails currently. People wanted us to expand trail access and accessibility. We could talk about the formal process of design and accessibility, but everyone wants to be able to use the trail, whether they use a mobility device, walk or bike, parents with strollers, many different combinations of that. People wanted us to enhance trail amenities and safety features. And so as Eric mentioned, we're working on a separate set of design guidelines that'll help do that, looking at amenities for the current trails and designed trails, and then looking at safety and how we accomplish safety while balancing safety and very often the natural scenery that people enjoy. People asked us to prioritize ecological resources and wildlife conservation. This is really important in DeKalb County, both as a developed urban county with fewer and fewer opportunities for conservation, but also as a county with a lot of great green spaces and a lot of great open spaces that need to be cherished and preserved. And that was really top of our list anytime we were looking at potential routes. And then finally, balancing trail improvements and maintenance, and understanding that when a trail gets built, it can be a cost up front, but then it's also a long-term cost to the county, and more miles require more maintenance over the long term. So finding ways to balance the size of the network and make it small enough that people can get to more places in the county, or big enough that people can get to more places in the county, but small enough that the county can maintain it over time. So all of these are sometimes conflicting, but all worthwhile goals that we were trying to pursue. Eric, next slide. So we boiled them down into a few key network principles. So first is increased connections between existing segments. And when we looked at the vision network and the potential projects to recommend, trying to meet as many of these as one time as possible. Provide access to daily local destinations, increase access to trails for all residents, both equity-wise and distribution across the whole county. Support intra-county and regional connectivity, so make sure that the trails line up at county boundaries in a way that's sensible. City of Atlanta, the North Fulton cities, Rockdale, Gwinnett County all support connections into the county. Limit the network to a sustainable mileage along really kind of core primary trunk lines. There's a lot of very small neighborhood pieces that aren't reflected on the map that are totally worthwhile and worth pursuing. But from the county's perspective, trying to keep that network somewhat limited and constrained. And then space the network equally across the county. So again, try not to cluster all of the recommendations in a portion of the county that is very excited and high demand and has a ton of potential, but make sure that it gets spread out evenly as much as possible. Next slide. So this is the vision network, and we're going to zoom in on this in just a second. So it's kind of high level. It's hard to get all the labels onto one map at any given time. But the pink magenta lines, and I'm a dedicated girl dad, so all of my working colors are always in pink and magenta. But big moves across the county that pull forward historic projects, look at local plans, and try to meet those network principles as much as we could. Pull in large scale and small projects that were elevated from different sources, and then really cast this network as a long-term or even a generational perspective. So say none of these trails are going to get funded in the next year or two. Some may take a couple of years, some may take more than that in even a couple of decades. But we want to cast the network in a way that when someone looks at it, they understand that over the long term, they will be able to travel around the county and get to different places and access many different destinations. Next slide. So the formal funding plan for the county currently in the CTP, we're going to mention this several times over and over again about the CTP and how it's adopted by the county, was adopted by the county commission in 2022, informs the formal funding recommendations for the county. So we want to bring those pieces forward. We want to elevate them into a level of importance in the vision network, and where they're disconnected, use the vision network to kind of span some of the gaps and show how the network can get connected together. Next slide. And we're going to zoom in on the top half and the bottom half so we can get more perspective. We have all these maps available. I'm happy to share them through the county. But starting to look at the northern portion of the county, which is just a little bit more incorporated. So the cities of Dunwoody, Doraville, Chamblee, Brookhaven, and Tucker, with the kind of sliver of the unincorporated portion of the county running around Mercer University and the kind of bigger Peachtree Creek Greenway area. And looking at that project in particular, which has so much great momentum behind it in the past several years, and it's really been very successful, as well as looking at north-south connections down into the central part of the county, and then elevating a few of the city's plans where they're really critical for connections at the county perspective. Next slide. And then flipping down to the bottom portion of the county, finding ways to look at Decatur, east to Stone Mountain, down to Stonecrest, and capture some of the great momentum around the South River Trail, the Arabian Mountain National Heritage Area, and the eastern portion of the county, and find ways to connect in some degrees east-west along the area, but very often north-south in different connections. Okay, next slide. So what our questions for you all today, and as Eric mentioned, I see some questions compiling in the question and answer section, which is really important. So we'll start getting to those near the end of the presentation. But our question is, did we miss anything significant? Is there any big piece at the county level that we need to be considering? Is there a demographic portion of the population, a community that's not represented that we're not serving? And then are there any red flags that would make it difficult to complete a specific project? We've been through a lot of community engagement. We've been through a lot of past plans to look for where some of those pitfalls might lie, and have done our best to anticipate them. And we've even made some adjustments in the past few weeks as we've heard from county commissioners on concerns that they have, and we're continuing to update and adjust that. But we'd love to hear from y'all, the attendees, about where some of those big flags are that we need to consider, and if we can move around them, or if it just needs a new approach more broadly. Next slide. Okay, and Eric, I'm going to turn back to you now.
Yeah, so I want to, I'll go back just a second and say that when we are asking these questions, ideally, we would love to get additional questions through the Vision Network survey that you can provide answers to there. And so I'm just going to walk through the process for providing feedback here. So let me pull this over. So this link takes you to the project website, and I know that some of you have already visited this website, but there's a section down here that describes the draft vision network, and we have a map here that you've already seen, but if you look at this button that says take the survey, that brings you to a new web page that asks for your specific feedback. And we also have a web map for you to look at and dive into. And I just want to show the ability to zoom in and out and understand where you are. And I also want to highlight the fact that right now the map is showing the draft vision network along with existing trails. So down here we have Arabia Mountain, which is existing, connecting to proposed trails. And if you want to see how other planned trails, such as some of the city trail plans, tie in, you can simply click on previously planned trails, and you get to see how these different trail plans, local trail plans, can connect to create a really interesting network across the county. So I'm going to, oh, I see a question. I missed how you got to that GIS tool, if you can show us again. So you go to this link. That link takes you to the project webpage. And there's a big button here that says take the survey. And if you click on that, it takes you to this page, which again describes the idea behind the network. And it looks like Anna is dropping in a link to the chat, which is great. And it gives you a chance to, down here, please review the vision network map and answer the questions that follow to share your perspective and comments. So that is how you get to the map. Next steps, I'm going to describe briefly. This presentation, it has been recorded, is still being recorded, and will be posted on the project website that I just shared with you all. And that will be distributed out to folks who registered for this meeting. We have a little bit of analysis left to do. We'll be considering the questions and feedback we've gotten tonight. We're also going to be ranking and prioritizing trail projects and developing some brief feasibility studies for several of the top ranking projects. In terms of timelines, on October 4th, we'll submit the final plan to DeKalb County, and we'll be meeting with various groups such as the Citizens Advisory Boards and the PECS Committee, that is the Planning, Economic Development, and Community Services Committee later that month, and we anticipate plan adoption in November. We've already kind of talked about questions and comments, and I'm going to turn it over to Anna now to kind of manage this piece of it. Thank you, Anna.
Sure, yeah, thank you, Eric. And just a reminder, so you can email the project team at info@dekalbgatrails.com. And there's also, if you go to our project website, dekalbgatrails.com, there's also a comment form that you can fill out there. And then just to clarify, I did see this question I wanted to clarify on the survey. There are multiple choice, but for both questions, there's also an opportunity for an open-ended response. So just wanted to clarify that. So we have a lot of questions, panelists. So I'm going to read them in the order we received them. Some are quick, some are a little bit more detailed. And I think as Eric mentioned before, our goal tonight is really to answer questions about the process and this presentation and make some clarifications about the Vision Network. But we will get through as many questions as we can tonight. And I think if we really start running out of time, we will provide some responses in writing and post this along with, we will be posting this presentation, the recording, everything to our project website. I will send out an email to you all, everyone who registered for the meeting, so that you will have access to that. Please email us at any time. I can send it to you. And so we will go ahead and get started. So first, does DeKalb County have a master plan for soft surface trails? Eric or Byron, if you want to answer that?
No. The biggest conglomerate of soft surface trails in the county are the area around South Fork of Peachtree Creek, Zona Light Park, in that area, in the South Fork Conservancy, and they do have a great master plan that is well underway and continue to be built out. So elsewhere in the county, since soft surface trails tend to be very often at the neighborhood scale, I don't know that there's one cumulative master plan for the whole county.
Okay, second, how will the plan for trails work with privately owned property along the path?
That's a very context-specific issue. So some trails will run along streets or roads, the side paths that we mentioned, and as much as possible, we try to work with existing right-of-way there. and not encroach onto private property. But of course, there are best practices for safety, such as providing substantial buffer from the roadway, especially the faster vehicular traffic travels along that roadway. And so the answer in that situation depends on whether the trail is part of the vision network and the county's appetite to get into acquiring private property. And it also depends on the property owner and their support. So in situations where you have independent alignments, again, very context specific. And beyond that, I would pass it off to the county to respond further to that one.
And I'll add to that. It's certainly a big topic and a very important one to consider. That every single publicly funded project always goes through a negotiation phase, and there's a procedural element, and there are a lot of laws around how to have those negotiations. And so no project would ever get done without the complete buy-in and negotiation with all property owners adjacent to the project in the area.
Thank you, Eric and Byron. All right, we're going to move to the next question. Which
And
corridors
I'm
seem
happy to rapid fire some of these. We can come back
Okay.
to it if necessary.
Which corridors seem to have the least barriers to being shovel ready?
That is very, very dependent upon the location. So very typically areas that have the fewer barriers to construction, to implementation, are the ones that are currently publicly owned and have fewer levels of environmental review that would have to go on them. So previously disturbed pathways or the shoulders of large roadways, areas that construction has been done, it's very typically easier to navigate that. Areas that have not been previously disturbed have a tremendous amount of environmental review that has to happen when public money gets spent. So those would typically have more barriers, but navigating infrastructure implementation is a long and complicated process. And so every project is going to have its own different considerations and concerns that have to be taken into account.
Is there a schedule posted about where there will be future community engagement? I can answer that one. So we're moving, towards the end of this project and community engagement. There will be some upcoming, as part of the review and adoption process, there will be meetings with different county boards and commissions that will be open to the public. And the Vision Network survey is still going on. So we will be collecting public input through the remainder of this project. What is an operational corridor? I think, Byron, this might have come up when you were speaking.
Yeah, I was trying to remember if I mentioned this. I don't know if I was rattling something off. I believe if I mentioned it, it was probably referring to a road using it already existing transportation corridor of some type or the other.
Yeah, I suspect that was a category shown on one of the comprehensive transportation plan maps, and I don't have the direct definition in front of me, but it's not particularly related to trails and greenways.
We have a lot of jargon in our field.
Yeah.
So try to do our best to avoid those if we can.
So the next question is, I believe it's related to the Vision Network survey. It's stating that the street names are not clear on the planning map. So that is why Eric walked through how to navigate to the web-based map that's a little more interactive and you can zoom in and see more detail. So I would refer you to the link that's in the chat that goes to the page on the project website where you can access that web-based map that gets into a little bit more detail. To what extent can watershed improvement projects be leveraged to provide new access opportunities?
Complicated question, complicated answer, but one of my favorites. Very often watershed management or the watershed department is out disturbing land for a totally different reason, sewer pipes, sewer easements, water pipes, or some type of other reason. And those often present an opportunity for trails but it's not always as clear cut as that. So the way that sewer typically works is through some sort of permanent or temporary easement along a property. And that easement has very strict definitions about what can and cannot be done in that land. And there are some places where that provides an opportunity to utilize it for trails. Several of the areas around, a lot of areas in DeKalb and a lot of areas in Fulton have used watershed projects effectively for trail building also. And there's other places where it's prohibited and it's not available. Any type of corridor in the county has restrictions or opportunities tied to it. So it's a great conversation, and it's one that's really worth having. It's a great internal county conversation for where trails, parks, transportation, and watershed all align with each other in the kind of cumulative public good. But it's never quite as simple as like, I see a pipe going, so where can we utilize it?
All right. This is a good one. Have you looked at crime reports for future planned routes?
Yes. So we looked at all the police reports from the past couple of years along all the current trails. I mean, not to be judgmental about it, but the trails are very safe. There's very few crimes reported on trails. Almost all the crimes that were associated with trails were around parking lots and vehicle entry. So when we're looking at safety solutions, we don't have to get into all the design behind it, but a lot of it is around maintenance and monitoring for parking lots where they're parked cars, exactly like we would see at stores, malls, in neighborhoods where cars and valuables are left unattended for hours or days at a time.
Why are natural and soft trails excluded from this plan? There are many areas that are inappropriate for these wide paved greenways, such as the floodplains. We shouldn't be force fitting paved routes through every single area.
Got my answer. Eric, you want to start that one?
The first piece of it is probably not a very satisfying answer, but it wasn't included in part of our scope. The scope was very specific about including paved pathways, the path style trails that currently exist in the county. Beyond that, I would have to pass it off to the county to respond to that one.
Yeah, Eric, I would actually I'd approach the question backwards and say that it's absolutely correct that there is no one size fits all. There is no one single design solution that meets every place in the county. So we do need to think creatively and thoughtfully about design. There are places where soft surface trails do work better, and there's places where design can help mitigate other problems that we see. On average, on the whole, over the life of trail networks, and we often say trail, and that gets confused with like the Appalachian Trail. The formal term for paths or shared use paths, they work better when they're concrete because they provide the most accessibility for the lowest long-term maintenance cost for the county. So they're the best average solution for more places than not, with that caveat that they have to be designed appropriately. We could get into bigger questions that very often trails provide an opportunity to improve runoff and drainage and improve natural vegetation. If an area is largely covered in kudzu or Chinese privet, a public investment there can bring in new natural pollinators and new land crafting that makes the area function better from a watershed and drainage perspective. But beyond that, it gets very complicated about how we approach design. But we all do keep the environment and design closely at heart, and the reason we're doing this work. So a lot of creative ways to approach each of these questions.
And I just wanted to add, I'm Paige Singer with DeKalb County Parks. That was a decision that we made. This was just a Greenways network master plan. So maybe at a future date we can look into, but that was a Scopes decision to just limit it for that purpose. But again, I go back to what Byron says, is each situation is unique, and that's goes back to the design guidelines and standards that we're going to be incorporating into the final document.
Thank you. Okay. Was there an analysis on how far people are willing to walk?
Not as part of this project, but there's a tremendous body of research elsewhere that we referenced for this. And we're going to keep saying it's a complicated question, and it does have a complicated answer. So typically, I'll phrase it in the way that funders and the federal government, when they fund transportation projects, look at it. They fund transportation projects for up to a mile for transit or pedestrian or transit access, and up to 3 miles for bicycle access. So those are really good rules of thumb. That for short daily neighborhood trips, walking around the block, that might be a quarter mile, half mile, something like that. But for a leisure or recreation trip, even up to a few miles, if I'm getting my 10,000 steps in, that's more than a few miles for the day. And then bicycle trips vary hugely, from a mile or a couple of miles for short trips, up to, as far as anybody ever wants to ride. So it's hard. We kind of keep things around that mile perspective, understanding that the heat of the summer in the hills, that tends to be about where people end up feeling comfortable. Yeah, Dan is totally right. 5 miles. So.
Okay, how will the trails be policed, and how close together will security cameras be to each other?
So security cameras to each other, that's dependent upon the technology, just how far security cameras in the network can stretch. How will the trails be policed? We've pulled some information from some other trails, and every program does this, and every police department does this a little bit differently. The Beltline has or had bike-mounted patrols that operated around it effectively. And we had a meeting with the county's fire and police departments and emergency response departments, and asked them this question about how they would feel comfortable using the trail. We got some different opinions, but once the trails are built, it's going to be up to the county to decide what the right method of policing that is. And it could be more emergency response for Arabia Mountain, where the risk of injury is greater and somebody needs to get to that. And it could be more community-oriented policing through different parts of the county where population and density is higher. But it's really going to depend upon the program that's the right fit for the community and the location.
How will we accommodate electric bikes and scooters, if at all?
This is an evolving question, especially with the speed and power of electric bikes that have increased greatly in the past few years. And certainly when a trail is built, it becomes like a roadway in the network that people are going to start using it with or without enforcement. And so the best thing we can do is start to design for the speed and ensure that curves and sight distances and people are able to navigate the trails safely and effectively on a little bit faster vehicles than we've been used to in the past. Beyond that, it's going to be a conversation with the county about how they want to regulate different vehicles. Typically, we say certainly no motorized vehicles on paths, greenways, or trails, but that has typically meant internal combustion, and with this kind of gray area with electric vehicles that are really, frankly, pretty awesome for increasing opportunities for people to walk, bike, or travel. But they take some extra consideration in terms of how we design for them to be operated.
Does the design team work with households along the path to inform decisions around placement?
Certainly.
And I think this was answered a little earlier on too. Okay. These get a little specific. To connect Southeast DeKalb to Stone Mountain, a gateway bridge across I-20 is needed, given the ongoing GDOT project at I-20 and I-285. Is this being considered?
I have noted that one for further investigation. Thank you for the comment.
Okay. This community input seems to be based on trail users and not as much the community that you plan to affect, or that this trail network would affect or impact. It seems you are planning ahead of what the actual community's homeowners decide as wanted and needed.
I don't think that's true. I think we've had a lot of conversations with a lot of different people. Certainly as the trail plan gets more specific, the conversations get more specific, and folks have turned out tonight. So we're excited to hear these comments and have these conversations. and hear some of these pieces as we go along.
Thank you. Okay, so I've, kind of going in order. So these next several are from Dan and they came to the chat. So what are the next steps for these plans? And I'm not sure if that means in terms of the next steps of the project or how this plan, what comes after this plan is adopted. I think it might be helpful to say, what would be the next step once this plan is adopted in terms of implementing some of those more specific trails.
Eric, I'm happy to let you start that one. Or the kind of beauty of the Vision Network is that it's big and bold and a little bit vague, and it shows those big connections. Each of those little pieces along there is going to take a different mechanism or method to bring to fruition. So we're putting into the county's Greenway master plan some strategies and recommendations for how to pursue different funding sources for different kinds of pieces. There's some trails that are better suited for local investment. There's some that are better suited for federal investment. Occasionally, there's some that are done privately through private mechanisms. But each of those pieces is going to take a different route to fruition. And there's another question here. I'll just go ahead and preempt about like how long will any of these pieces take? And they will all progress along different timelines related to the different types of funding sources that end up getting pursued to build them. But the immediate steps for the plan is this Greenway plan get adopted by the county commission, and then the county staff have the mandate to go forward and start to find ways to build each of these segments through each of the different routes and mechanisms and break all this down into its constituent pieces.
So in that same series of questions is if we could start working all of these plans tomorrow, what would the estimated cost be?
We are, that is pending analysis from HRNA, our economic development team, and that will be part of the final plan.
All right. Who will be responsible for implementing and building these trails?
Given our mandate as a team, they largely all fall back with the county, DeKalb County and the county staff. Some of them, especially the ones from the CTP, will kind of remain with the county transportation department. Some of them will kind of get moved over into the parks department for different elements. So DeKalb County broadly as a whole, and then into different departments wherever is most appropriate. As you've seen on the Vision Network, we've elevated a few local plans, a few local segments that would be important for connectivity, and those would rest with that city's government to pursue.
What do they need to do to put this plan into action and start building trails?
Make sure I read all this as well. I mean, I think the fun thing about working with DeKalb County is they're already building so many. So there's a lot of stuff. We've every time we put out a map, we've been tweaking and filling it because something's already in progress going a different direction or the other. So I mean, the short answer is the county's just going to keep doing each of these projects. But for new elements, for new pieces that are not in the works yet, they're very often, Eric went through the process, but it takes some sort of conceptual process to start to get more specific about where that will be located, and then move it into formal funding and engineering phases. We break big projects up into discrete phases, one for funding, one for design, one for property acquisition, if that should be necessary, one for design, and then on to construction. So specific projects will start moving through those different layers as they go.
Do you factor commercial development, either current or future, into your plans?
Very broadly. So as we showed on some of the maps, we've been looking for places that the county envisions more dense commercial development. But beyond that, we did a little bit of a cost benefit analysis that pulls in a little bit of economic development. But it's really it gets, the further out we get, the greater it gets. So we have looked at where trails will connect to commercial development, but not necessarily anticipating the level or amount of commercial development that will occur in the county over the future.
And I think, that's something that would be looked at as you get into those more specific feasibility studies and more specific studies. why haven't path trails, particularly the one running through central DeKalb, not experienced the commercial development that has occurred along the Beltline?
Does anybody want to hang out for the rest of the evening? We can just have a chat about that. I mean, short answer is the Beltline community, the Beltline neighborhoods were already primed for a significant amount of commercial reinvestment over the past several decades, just naturally through market forces. And given the diversity of the areas in the metro region as a whole, not every place can sustain that level of private commercial investment. And I really think it's the beauty of DeKalb County and many of our other kind of quieter, more suburban, more residential areas, that they are not under that level of development pressure. And trails and greenways and paths are cool because they slot into lots of different types of areas. And so the Beltline is a national story. I'll hesitate to say a national success story, but it is a national story for how a trail has partnered and been supported by enormous amounts of private commercial investment. But not every path is going to see that level of demand.
How many miles of trails are proposed in the draft plan?
Do you have our most recent number? We've been making changes up until this afternoon for this. So I don't know where
I'm not sure I have a current number, but it will absolutely be included in the final plan.
Okay, so I think we are, we're 15 minutes over our scheduled presentation time. And so we as the project team will go through the rest of the questions, like I mentioned, and can provide responses and send those back out to the group. We will post the recording. In the meantime, we will post the recording and slide deck to the project website, and I will email you all when that's available. Also, please go to the website to subscribe to our project updates if you haven't already. And then I think we're going to go ahead and close out. Eric or Byron or anyone from the county, do y'all want to say anything before we close?
I would like to say thank you to the number of attendees. It's rare that I'm in a meeting with over 120 attendees, and that is really great to show the level of interest and engagement in DeKalb County, both hard questions and supportive questions. I appreciate them all. And I'll say even more specifically, thank you to the folks in the questions who are putting specific places and things that we may need further investigation. Bridge over I-20, connections into East Atlanta Village, and lots of other corners of the county that deserve a little bit greater attention. So certainly thank you for doing that. As we get into the final push of this, having that specificity is very helpful.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Please contact us if you have any questions, and thanks again for coming. We appreciate your time and input.
And thank you to Tool. We appreciate y'all being here tonight for all your hard work. Thank you from DeKalb County Parks.